Hi, I'm Jo from J.H.Leather, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a studded padded dog collar with reflective piping. Let's get started. So for this video you will need a D-ring and a buckle, some conical studs, a strip of reflective tape, a filler for that, I'm using a 2mm filler, a strip of leather, some leather looping, 6mm padding foam and some 0.8mm padding leather. So to get started we're going to find the best end of our leather and then square the end with our set square and awl and then cut this across. We can now cut our point, so I'm going to cut an egg point on my dog collar here. So once you're happy with your turn, we can now mark out for our holes. So the first hole is going to be 2 inches from the point end as normal, and then I'm doing a large collar, so my holes are going to be 1 inch apart, and we're going to mark 5 holes in total. And then from the last hole I'm going to mark a further 1.5 inches, and that will be where my stitching will finish to. Once you've marked all that out, you can then mark the overall length of your dog collar and even it up with your set square, and then add a further 2 inches onto that for the back of your turn and cut this off. And we're just going to mark on the back of our sort of point end where our stitching will stop on that straight bit and mark across, and then edge number 1 across the top of the flesh side, and then just on the point end of the flesh up to that mark that we just drew with our set square and all. The next thing we want to do is just skive some of that scrap end of leather and skive 2 wedges. These are going to go either side of our D-ring. And then we're going to stain and crease our dog collar. So once we've stained and creased, we just want to set our dividers so we can even up all our holes. And then we want to reset them so we can draw our 2 tram lines for our crew punch. Once you're happy with your sort of tram lines here, we can then punch the crew all the way through our leather strap. And using a number 6 edge tool, we're just going to edge around the back of that crew hole. We're now going to sort of get our turn ready so we can stitch mark. So you may need to wet the turn depending on how stiff your leather is, just so it doesn't crack. And you want to pop your buckle in and squish that nice and tight up to the turn and mark with your thumbnail where you can stitch to, and then even these lines up on the other side with your set square. You can now set your dividers to your stitching length and draw the line between the holes we marked earlier and those 2 that we just marked up at the buckle end, and then using a round object just want to complete your stitching with a little egg point on that end. And we're now going to stitch mark the collar, so I use number 7 stitch marker for all my dog collars, And we're just going to stitch mark all the way around the collar. So once we've done stitch marking, as you can see, the legs on our studs are a bit too short. So we're going to mark 2 inches back from the centre of our crew and draw a line across with our set square. And we're actually going to split in between these 2 lines so that our studs will fit properly. So you want to just do a test bit first, just to make sure you get the right sort of thickness. I don't want to take too much off. As you can see, it's quite the slither that I take off there, but it's just enough so that the sort of legs of the studs sit sort of through well on the leather. And once you've you got your splitter set, you can then split between the 2 lines on the dog collar. And then once you've done that, you can now sort of mark out for where your studs are going to go. So generally, I sort of start either end and then fill in between and sort of those 2 studs with however many I think I can fit on. And we're just going to roughly place them now so we can get an idea as to how far apart they will need to be. So once I sort of know the rough measurement they need to be apart, I can then mark where I want them to start to. So I mark that one first, and then my studs that I'm using are 1/2 inch in diameter. So I'm going to mark 1/2 inch from there, and then I end up doing my studs 1 1/4 inch apart. So you want to mark that out, and then your 1/2 inch again, and all the way down so you've filled your collar. And I put 7 studs on mine in total. And once you've marked on all your points, you then want to even them up with your dividers. And then we're now going to punch the sort of slots for this. So I'm using a sharpened screwdriver, which is the same width as the legs on the studs. And you just want to punch this all the way through. So once you've punched all your holes through, we can now start fitting the studs. So generally I pop my studs all in first, and then using my set square and the tack hammer, I will then fold the legs over and just tap the legs so that they are nice and secure. So here with my set square, I'm just squishing the leather down and making sure that the stud is nice and tight to the leather before tapping the legs closed with my tack hammer. You don't want to hit these too hard with your hammer, which is why I'm just doing it onto my workbench, because you don't want sort of to blunt or dent the end of the studs. And now we're going to make the turn. So you want to skive the end of your turn, and then you can pop your buckle in and start assembling. We're also going to have to cut out some of our looping at this point as well, and tack that in also. And we can now tack in both of our wedges around our D-ring. Right, so we're now ready for our reflective piping part of this make. So we're going to get our reflective tape. Mine is 1 inch wide, and you just want to mark just so it's about roughly the same length as your stitching, and you want 2 strips of this. And now I'm using 2mm machine belting here for my filler, which I found is really good for this type of work. I'm just going to skive the end, mark the overall length that we need, and cut to length. And I'm going to cut a second piece as well for the other strip. And skive both ends on there also. So once we've done that, we can then glue them onto our reflective piping, or reflective tape even. Once they're glued on, we're now going to actually make the piping part. So we're just going to fold or roll the tape over the piping, and we're going to squish the tape as close into that filler as we can to make it sort of more pronounced on one side. So we're just going to do that with our nail to start with, and then once we've done that, we can then use a bone just to make sure that it's nice and tight in to that edge of the fold. So if you get a bit where your filler's not sort of touching sort of the fold sort of in the right place, you can just have to wiggle it around a bit and make sure you get it sort of in the middle so that you get an even piping all the way along. And now we're going to start to glue them onto our main dog collar. So you'll see in a minute, I'm just going to sort of clip the end of my piping with my scissors, just so it sort of folds around a bit easier and we don't get too much of a bulk in the centre of the collar. And you want this as tight to your collar as possible. So that little sort of groove that we put in with the bone folder and our finger earlier, that's going to sit right on the edge of the edge of the leather. So I'm just going to sort of make sure these are both the same size and clip the ends. Now this is probably the most fiddliest part of doing the piping, is actually gluing it on, because we want to get it nice and tight and even along the whole of the collar. So if you get to a point where it's not going on evenly, you can just whip it off, re-glue it, and sort of try again. It's not going to affect sort of the reflectiveness of the piping in any way. So you start from one end and get that piping nice and tight in there to the edge of your leather. So I'm actually going to get my scissors in a minute, and I'm going to snip here just a little notch into my reflective piping, just to get that to fold around a lot nicer and easier than what it was doing before. So you might need to do this on yours as well. So we'll make sure those ends are tucked right in and you don't have any sort of fallout there. Our padding is going to cover most of that, but if you've got like the little tab end of the piping sticking out, then your collar, it's not going to look as nice. So you can see I am fiddling with the piping a lot here, making sure it's nice and tight into the collar, taking bits off and putting bits back on as needed. And you can actually tack in these ends as well, which I do because they're being a bit awkward. So once your piping is in place, you just want to mark the out for the foam padding. So generally I add an 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch to my padding. So we've got to remember that the piping is going to add to that overall width. So you want to add on to that measurement, not your collar measurement. And once you cut your strip of foam out, you just want to taper the ends and skive them to nothing with your knife. And then we can mark the overall length we need for our padding. And again, taper this end. So my padding, I've done a longer taper on the point end, which I'm just going to mark it to make sure I get it the right way around, just to take into account sort of where the piping finishes. And once you're happy with your foam, you can then cut out your padding. And glue your foam and your padding lining together. So sort of the rest of this is now the same as any other padding collar. We're sort of going to glue the two pieces together and sort of make the padding mark out where the sort of liner sits in the middle of the foam and glue that around. So if you're here just to see how the piping bit works, that bit's done now. If you've not done padding before, this is what we're going to be doing. So we're just wrapping our lining around the foam and marking roughly where the middle is, and then we're going to cut with our scissors and trim off any excess leather. And now we've done that, we can then glue the lining around our foam filler. You want to make sure you get your leather nice and tight to your foam. You don't want any sort of baggy bits, as it were, around on your foam. So as you can see, I sort of fold my leather up and around and glue the edges on first before folding it around the top of the filler. And then we want to use our scissors at an angle and just trim the end there. And then we can mark for the overall length. And once we've done that, we can just glue the foam onto our dog collar. And once everything is glued together, we can now stitch it. So we're going to double hand stitch our dog collar as normal. So we're going to start with the back stitch, do one stitch over the edge just to close that turn nice and tight on the buckle there, and then stitch the rest of the collar as normal. Remembering when we get to our D-ring, we're going to do one long stitch over the D-ring, and then we'll do a back stitch, and then we'll continue going forward. So you'll have 3 stitches over your D-ring. Remember when you get to your D-ring that you want to make sure the long stitch over the D-ring is in line with the one on the other side. Then do your long stitch over there, and then remember it's easier to pre-awl your holes around where the loop's going to go first before putting the other side of the loop in place. And when we get to the end of the collar, we're going to do one stitch over the edge and then 1.5 back stitches, and then we can trim our threads off. And once we finish stitching our collar, the second to last thing we're going to do is to do our finishing touches. So we're going to restain the collar and polish the edges. I'm just doing mine around the turn because I like the finish of the collar that I had on it from my original staining. And then we're going to re-crease around the collar as well. And the final thing we're going to do is to punch the all-important holes in our point end. And there you have your final dog collar. If you like the video, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe for more videos and tutorials. Also, keep an eye on the channel because we are going to be launching a new tools series. I'm going to try and do a little tool video once a month, sort of in depth on that. So click to be alerted as well, so you'll be the first to hear about my new videos. Thank you.